Welcome to the latest episode of We Got Planning News for You. I'm Charlie Banner from Keating Chambers. I'm here in my chambers this evening. Can I start by, as always, encouraging viewers to make a charity donation in lieu of a registration fee? Regular viewers will know that the charities we support are listed on our website, havewegotplanningNewsForYou.com. But as always, please feel free to make a donation to a local charity of your choice. Now, we're delighted this evening for our final regular episode of this year, pending a potential special on the new MPPF, if and when it finally lands. Delighted to welcome my colleague in the House of Lords, Lord Moylan, Daniel Moylan, Chair of the House of Lords Built Environment Committee, Shadow Transport spokesman in the House of Lords. But we must stress, speaking not in those capacities tonight, but purely in a personal capacity. Daniel, welcome, and may I ask you, as I always do, where are you calling from this evening, and what, if anything, are you drinking this evening?
I'm at home and I'm drinking water.
Very advisable.
And I was in the House of Lords today at question time when the housing minister in the Lords said that the NPPF would be published before recess, so before the 19th of December.
Or on the 19th of December, perhaps.
Possibly on the 19th of December. But there you are. There is a ministerial commitment which cannot be gainsaid.
So we count the days, literally, possibly even the hours. Well, Danny, we're really looking forward to hearing all your insight on infrastructure, planning, and much more. Paul's going to be leading that interview with you later on this evening. It's certainly very dark where you are, Paul, and probably is all the time, actually, given how far north you are. In the meantime, let me introduce the panel. I should say, as always, as I say to all my guests, if there's anything you'd like to contribute to our chat on the news roundup, Sasha, I think, is going to be talking about Keir Starmer's announcement in a moment, or indeed any of the cases, feel free to do so, but no obligation. And let's introduce the panel, starting, as always, Mary, with an unfamiliar background there. Where are you?
Well, good evening, Charlie, and welcome to the show, Daniel. It's lovely to have you on. I'm in Wandsworth. I'm in the woods in Wandsworth, up there behind the curtain, and I too am being very righteous and drinking water.
Aren't we all sensible? I'm drinking green tea as well, so there we are. Sasha, how are you doing?
Good evening, Charlie. I'm very well. I'm in the delights of Ascot. I've been driving past the race course. Very sad it's not June rather than December, but I'm in Ascot, and I'm afraid I'm like you. I'm in one of these funky new bottles. I'm drinking water, but of course I've got to put it in a funky bottle, so you think you're not drinking water.
Gosh, we've come a long way since the lockdown when we were advertising all sorts of different beers and other concoctions. Paul, how are you doing up there in the dark?
In the land of the midnight sun, yes. Nice to see you, Charlie, and welcome, Daniel. It's a pleasure to see you. Yes, I too am tragically drinking water as well. I got the memo. I did ask my wife to bring me a drink, and she brought me this rubbish, a kefir blackcurrant. So that's sitting there, and where it will remain, I'm afraid to say. So yes, I'm on water.
Fantastic. Oh, Chris, let's hope you've got a pint of gin or something more exciting.
I haven't even got a drink. I'm in chambers, and I am not drinking anything. But I think what we need to reflect on the fact is during lockdown, everybody was drinking. It was quite a challenging time, and 5 o'clock seemed like a good time to relax. But now we're all running around, working incredibly hard, and we're all drinking water. So, but I haven't even got water. I'm in chambers. Nice to meet you, Daniel.
Hello, Chris.
Lovely to see you, Chris. We can see what you've got on your screen, so you better shut down your OnlyFans page. And on that note, Sasha, you're going to tell us about the news in the planning and built environment world. So over to you.
I absolutely am, but my first item has been nicked by our guest. No, I'm very pleased he did, but I was going to start with the announcement about the MPPF, so I'll just reconfirm. But no, I think it was very strange when I got a call from number 10 this morning saying, have we got planning news for you is this afternoon. So that's why the Prime Minister's ripped up the previous speech he was going to make, and instead he's going to talk about the planning system, just so you can break it on have we got planning news for you this afternoon. I think for anyone who works in planning, in all seriousness, it is incumbent upon them and mandatory to read the Prime Minister's speech, because whatever your political hue, I think it's probably the most forceful speech made about the planning system that I've certainly can remember. And what was said, putting aside politics, what was said was delivered with some strength. And the first thing, it was announced that he called his speech the plan for change, and there can be no solution to the housing crisis without approving controversial developments. So that nettle was grasped. Reconfirmation of the 1.5 million target, which has been a cornerstone of Labour's manifesto. And what he said about the planning system is pretty profound and pretty powerful. It was described by our Prime Minister as a blockage in our economy, which obscures an entire future. And it stops the country building the roads, the laboratories, the train lines, the warehouses, the wind farms and the power stations necessary for our future. And of course, he characterised the fighting of projects tooth and nail by those that oppose. And what he said, and this is really quite powerful, the government will not accept this nonsense now. And I think that might appear in a Mr. Young opening in the near future. And also, what he's announced is that the government are going to seek to approve 150 major infrastructure projects. We won't talk about predetermination. And he had a message to NIMBYs, regulators, blockers and bureaucrats. I mean, we should get that T-shirt printed over Christmas. Britain says yes, and we're going to rebuild Britain through the power of change. Now, just for a moment, I think collectively those comments are pretty powerful comments on the planning system by the leading politician and our leader of our current government with a 4.5-year mandate left. I just wanted to say a couple of other things which are relevant, of course, because in the light of what Daniel said about the NPPF, it's also important we must all acknowledge an active and interventionist Secretary of State with increased use of call-in. And we have, in the past, since our last episode, we've had 3 call-ins. Now, one of the criticisms, Daniel, will be interested to hear about, have we got planning news for you, which is completely unfair, is we use it to parade our successes and not our failures. Well, I'm going to parade a failure. I lost a large inquiry in Cheshire, which was called in by the Secretary of State for 3 million square feet in a logistics park, and the Secretary of State refused it on the 22nd of November. However, there have been 2 quite powerful grants in the past 3 days of call-ins. The first is the prison proposal in Lancashire, which it's noteworthy was an inspector recommendation for refusal, but the Secretary of State overturned that by recommending the grant of consent. And then fresh, absolutely hot off the press, a place where generations of those that live in London, which includes Daniel, Charlie and I, have bought our underpants in the M&S Oxford Street. Mm-hmm. And what we have is a grant of consent. As those of our viewers know, that was originally turned down by Michael Gove, and today the Secretary of State has approved it after a High Court challenge by the applicants. So that is my news update, Charlie, today. Pretty topical, frankly.
Thanks very much indeed, Sasha. I read Keir Starmer's speech, and I noticed that in line with a lot of front bench speakers, not Daniel actually, but a lot of as common speakers, every paragraph is a sentence long, and I can only think of one other person on the planet who writes in that style, and that's you in your closing submissions. Well known for your very powerfully put one-sentence paragraphs.
Yeah, I promise I deny.
You're his speechwriter. You're his
I
have deduced from this information. And on that note, we're now going to go to Chris. And Chris, you're going to tell us all about a decision from Chichester.
I am indeed. Thank you very much, Charlie. So this is a proposal which is for substantial development in the countryside in Chichester, where, as you probably know, they don't have a 5-year supply. And in fact, through this appealed decision and through Ben Pycroft's work, they didn't have a 4-year supply. And this is still, because we still got the existing NPPF, this is Michael Gove's crazy 4-year supply idea, which is about to hit the buffers and be removed in about 2 weeks' time. But the simple point is they had to show a 4-year supply and they didn't. The inspector found 3.98 years. Well done, Mr. Pycroft. but it didn't mean the tilted balance was applied because of the effect of the footnote. So that's the context. We've got a proposal here where there was a lack of a 4-year supply. And as you can see, it was a proposal for 108 dwellings. But that was only one of 3 components of this appeal, because the next component was 900 square meters of refurbished buildings and new buildings to amount to a rural enterprise centre, a farm hub, which had retail in it, glamping sites, everything you could possibly want, frankly. And then the third component, and this is the biggie, was 500 houses and a primary school. So not a new settlement scale, but certainly a very significant amount of development. Now, the thing I want to show you first of all is where it was. So very helpfully, Matthew Reed, who acted for the council, has provided the plans for me. These are from the design and access statement. Thank you, Matthew, for those. And you can see the red line areas for this proposal. And spot, if you will, the settlement that they're attached to. Yeah. You won't find it. This proposal was promoted in basically the open countryside. If we go to the next plan, that's where it is. It says Rickman's Green Village, but there's no village there. That was the proposal, really. And as far as the settlement is concerned, Chichester as a district has Chichester as the main settlement, obviously. It then has 4 settlement hubs below that, providing a range of uses. And then below that are 3 serviced villages, or a series of service villages, including Plaistow, Ilford and Loxwood. And as you can see, the settlement, this proposal wasn't attached to any of them. So it was a wholly new proposal, freestanding in the countryside. And the outcome of this is that all 3 appeals were dismissed. There were 12 main issues that the inspector identified, the first of which was location. And all I want to do is just focus on that issue. They failed on a number of other issues as well, but the inspector identified, obviously, it lay outside of the settlement boundary. He said the council have got an out-of-date plan, obviously lack of fibre land supply, so they've got to be flexible. But he said the location has very limited accessibility. The local road network consists of rural lanes, and the nearest A and B roads are some distance away. The lanes are quiet, they're unlit, they're windy, and they have no separate footways. Limited services and facilities are 2 kilometres away at Plaistow. It's a primary school and so on. He said that the facilities were not within a reasonable walking distance. Higher order services and facilities, including most employment, were well beyond walking and cycling distance. There's no convenient railway station. The on-site facilities would provide for some day-to-day facilities, but I've been given no data on trip generation. So basically, this is just a proposal in the wrong place. Now, the reason I raise this is for those that worry about what's coming, which is lots of large housing numbers and lots of opening up of greenbelt sites, for example, inspectors aren't going to allow development in the middle of the countryside that's got no connection to settlements. You need to follow the basic principles of geography and look to locate development at an appropriate scale next to the nearby development. And decisions like this will continue to be made, whether there's a lack of fibre land supply or a lack of an up-to-date plan. And it failed. And I have to say, who honestly on this panel thinks it failed for anything other than entirely blindingly obvious reasons? I'm sorry to be so blunt and forthright about it, but I just cannot see how you could promote something that scale and not effectively have it tied to a settlement and not be accessible to services. I won't list all the other things they failed on, but they failed in terms of habitats, and as a consequence of which the tilted balance didn't apply. And if we just have a look finally at the appearances, well done to the council's team. As I said, they were represented by Matthew Reed, and we can see there a whole list of consultants were employed by the council to deal with the 12 reasons for refusal. That's the second page of them. That was a big old inquiry. It lasted 3 weeks, and the outcome, I have to say, entirely predictable.
Thanks, Chris. Now I'm going to do the next case, and I'm going to take you to the Hertfordshire Greenbelt for the second episode running. You might recall I did a Hertfordshire Greenbelt case in St Albans last time around. Well, this one is in Hertfordshire Borough. The site was on the edge of Boreham Wood. It was a BDW scheme for up to 220 dwellings, including 50% affordable housing, and at least 7 custom or self-build plots. Note the front page. The inquiry lasted 5 days, concluded on the 13th of November, and no more than 2 weeks later, the inspector allowed the appeal. That's pretty much record timing, certainly for a Greenbelt VSC case. So bravo to Inspector Wildsmith for turning it around so quickly. Now, the context for this scheme was that the council could only demonstrate, and it accepted this itself, a 1.36 years housing land supply. The site had the benefit of a draft allocation in the council's emerging Regulation 18 local plan, which had been published in April this year, an earlier plan-making process having been aborted in 2022. Now, the inspector, in paragraph 26 of the decision, said that even if the Regulation 18 plan could be given only very limited weight at this stage, because it's very early in the process, the evidence base, the assessment work that had gone into judging which sites could most appropriately be released from the Greenbelt was an important material consideration, indeed one that appeared to feature quite heavily on his mind. And that's quite an important point, reflect the distinction between a draft plan, generally limited weight, and the evidence base, which can be very important, perhaps even determinative. Now, in terms of impacts, fairly vanilla for a Greenbelt case, moderate adverse impact on openness, varying degrees of conflict with the 3 of the Greenbelt purposes, moderate and very little on 2 of them, significant in relation to encroachment in the countryside, but that's fairly standard because if it's a greenfield site, it will be countryside. It's quite hard to get around that Greenbelt purpose unless it's PDL or similar. There were limited and localised effects on landscape character. The site was, so the inspector considered, self-contained and well-screened. There would be some adverse visual impacts too, but mainly on adjacent receptors, not exclusively, but mainly so. And there was no significant other harm. On the other side of the scale, the inspector spent quite a lot of time really going to the nooks and crannies of debates about how much weight to be given to particular considerations. And where he landed for the 3 most important points was for market housing. Very substantial weight was given, and that was a product of a number of factors. Firstly, the 1.3-year housing supply. Secondly, the fact that the plan-making process in Hertfordshire had stalled in recent years, not unique in Hertfordshire in that respect due to Greenbelt and other considerations. It was likely to slip further post the new framework, given that the council was unlikely to escape the transitional provisions of the new framework. 80% of the borough was Greenbelt, and that meant, so the evidence showed, that only some 20 to 25% of the required housing could be accommodated on brownfield sites. So it was the combination of those factors that got the delivery of market housing the top notch in the ranking of weight, very substantial. Ditto affordable housing for broadly similar reasons, plus there was a shortfall of affordable housing of 2,206 dwellings, affordable dwellings, in only the first 4 years of the most recent local housing needs assessment. Not a particularly great start. Custom and self-build was the subject of significant debate as to how much weight that should get. The inspector considered that the key points there were the shortfall in custom and self-build housing against the register of custom self-build, which was exacerbated the fact that the register itself was, he judged, likely to understate the true need. So he gave substantial weight to custom self-build. There were various other factors that also weighed positively in the balance. Overall, therefore, the inspector found that there were very special circumstances to clearly outweigh the harm to the Greenbelt, and the development plan conflict was outweighed. Now, the key takeaways are, as far as like the St Albans case I covered last time around, This is a scheme that didn't have any what you might call unique goodies or semi-unique, such as a country park, a GP surgery, a special educational needs school, the kinds of things that take a scheme away from the norm. This was a house that had 50% affordable, but it was a pretty much relatively standard breakdown of development that you expect in this location. So what was very special, the key points were emerging allocations, sub 2-year supply, track record of local authority failure, evidence that the local authority, whatever the final local plan was to say, it was clearly going to have to involve some greenbelt release, given there's no prospect of coming even close to meeting, remotely close to meeting housing needs on non-greenbelt land. Pulled together, those factors seem now to be capable of surmounting a strong VSC case, even without special factors such as those I've mentioned, and they didn't even have to allow a grey belt. So an interesting decision. Well done to those involved for the successful party, and well done again to the inspector for turning it around in a long and comprehensive decision in breakneck speed.
And Charlie, just look how many greenbelt appeals are being allowed at the moment. There's scores and scores of them.
Indeed. But on the right site, it's important that on this one he found limited impacts as well. So it goes back to your point, Chris, too. So it's all about the right site and the right circumstances. And now, Mary, you're going to tell us about another appeal. Great chart.
Yes, I'm going to take you to Ashford Borough Council. And this was a decision of Inspector Young, as you will see in one moment. And you can see that the application was for development of up to 655 residential units, 30% affordable housing, with only access to be determined at the outlined stage. This is a 6-day inquiry. The inspector benefited from 5 specific topic papers on and detailed statements of common ground. There was agreed to be no 5-year housing land supply, so the tilted balance applied. The policies which were most important were considered, therefore, to be out of date. And Rob has a plan for us. It was a 24-hectare greenfield site on the southwest of Ashford. And you can see the outline of the scheme in red. And to the east of that, note that, please, that was the planned new community of 5,007 homes set out in the Chilmington Green Area Action Plan. So this application was being promoted in the context of no 5-year housing land supply as an adjunct, if you will, to a planned new community which had not yet come forward. That's important. And one of the points the Borough Council was taking was a density issue, because they suggested that the density of the proposal was greater than the density of the approved new community as per the action plan. But that was a 2013 action plan, and the inspector disagreed with that submission, bearing in mind the vintage, as it were, of the 2013 area action plan densities, the imperative to use land efficiently, and also the landscape buffers proposed. You will have seen in that plan they're quite significant landscape buffers. The real issues that took up a lot of the inspector's time were between the county council, Kent County Council, also represented. So it was a three-handed fight, if you like, the district, the county, and the appellant. And the real issue was all about the extent of off-site highway mitigation proposals. And our inspector was himself a qualified engineer. And he rejected at paragraph 22 Kent County Council's threshold for severity. Kent were suggesting that if you had a 5% increase in the ratio of flow to capacity, so that's the RFC, or a 60-second increase in delay, somehow you would be triggering paragraph 115 of the MPPF. And the inspector described that as a very long way from his interpretation of very great or severe impact. And there's a lot of detail about the rival modelling. And I'm just going to pick out a couple of paragraphs, really, in which the inspector comments on the conflicting modelling. So this is paragraphs 43 and 44 for our listeners. He commented on the conflicting modelling outputs, which he said were not helped by the different approaches to background growth, intercept values and assignment that the respective parties had adopted, and that it couldn't be right when such a large scheme as this comes forward for there to be such disparity between the main parties. He said it was not for him to conduct a detailed forensic investigation. Rather, he chose to base his conclusions on his own experience and extensive observations. So just standing back, I would suggest it is incumbent on main parties to seek more common ground in cases where there are modelling disputes. It's really not helpful for there to be such disparity. So he ended up in coming down in favour of largely in favour of the appellant. So well done, Ian Dix, who was the highway witness for the appellant. There's another issue that I want to draw attention to, and that was an argument about these secondary school places. The new community was planning to come forward with a new secondary school, and there was an issue about whether this Peel proposal could take up some of those secondary places which wouldn't be filled immediately. And the inspector ruled against the appellant on that, and the argument was all about the proper meaning of paragraph 66 of the Department for Education's guidelines. And the thrust of this was that by September next year, this secondary school was due to be open, but not all of those spaces would have been taken up because not all of the new homes in the new community would have been built. So the developer was trying to use up, as it were, some of those spaces on the basis of first come, first served. And the inspector said, no, it's not for the development to take up capacity which is already planned and created by another scheme. So take note if you're in that situation in the future. There was a 106 obligation which secured new bus services. Interestingly, the waste treatment works needed to be upgraded, and this proposal was making a contribution to that. If you were looking for examples of Grampian-style conditions, there were many Grampian-style conditions. No occupation of homes until the supermarket on the new community was open. No occupation of homes until the secondary school was open. Quite unusual Grampian conditions. Again, on the 106 contributions, he said Kent County Council's library contributions were not justified. He frankly didn't think the SEND contributions were justified, but because the main parties had agreed, I think he gave the County Council the benefit of the doubt. He says as much, and he gives them a very clear warning that they need to improve their evidence base if they're looking to achieve those sorts of contributions in the future. So this is particularly relevant to anyone in Kent, but there are wider lessons to be drawn from that. And in the end, because of his findings, he decided that highways was neutral in the overall planning balance, bearing in mind it was a tilted balance, bearing in mind the significant landscape buffers. He clearly came down in favour of the grant of permission.
Thanks.
Could I just, I think Sasha chooses the cases, and I think that's a brilliant case because how many inspectors are actually qualified highway engineers? Stuart Nixon was one. You remember Stuart Nixon? But we've got an inspector here saying a 60-second delay isn't severe. I think that is extraordinarily significant from a highway engineer inspector. How many times are we told that you can't have these delays?
Well, Chris, there's a lot of detail in this. So, there are all sorts of interesting points, but I'm just trying to keep it high level. But yes, agree. And it's a very well written decision letter. Well done, Inspector Young.
Thanks very much, Mary. Now, back over to Paul to more fully introduce our guest, Daniel Bill Moylan, and to start the interview. So over to you.
Lord Moylan, welcome to the show. You were born and educated in Birmingham, and despite that, you rose to the presidency of the Oxford Union, and you secured Richard Nixon as a guest. I bet you're the only person, with the exception of Sasha, on this show who's ever met a former US president. You started your career in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, heading to South Africa and Southwest Africa, sometime in the city, but your keen interest in politics led you to become a councillor and rise to deputy leader in the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, wherever that is, with a particular responsibility for planning. You've then had a variety of prestigious roles. And to be honest, I could spend the next half an hour going through your extraordinary CV, Daniel. Either you've self-edited Wikipedia or you really are one of the most prestigious guests that we've ever had on the show. So you were deputy chair of TfL, chair of the mayoral design advisory panel in 2009, under one Boris Johnson, whoever he is. You were chair of the London Legacy Development Corporation, overseeing the future of the Olympic Park. You advised on the future of London airports. You were created Baron Moylan in 2020, describing your career as being a series of happy stumbles. You're an honorary fellow of the RIBA. You are Shadow Minister of Transport in the House of Lords. And taking a breath, you are currently the House of Lords Built Environment Committee until January, although to be clear, you're not speaking on behalf of the Built Environment Committee, you're speaking on your own terms. I can now breathe. So we have a lot of questions for you, Daniel, you'll be pleased to hear. My first one was, having said in your maiden speech in the Lords that your career is a series of happy stumbles, I might add the word extraordinary happy stumbles, covering a wide range of issues, where do your passions lie, and have you become disenchanted with any of the areas?
Well, it's quite interesting to hear you talk about your planning cases, because it's 6 or 7 years since I've had direct involvement with planning. And of course, some of your terminology is completely new to me. I have no idea what a tilted balance is. Or which particular footnote it was that turned out to be determinative in Chris's case. And it just reminds me how rapidly things move on. I think at one stage I did have a sort of intellectual affection for the balance and sort of structure of the mental structure of the planning system that had been put together, by parliamentary draftsmen and politicians who really had a sort of feel for how things could be made, laws that could be made that would be durable, flexible enough to last, and so on. But I rather agree, I have to say, and I emphasize again what you said, Paul, that I'm speaking entirely in a personal capacity, not for the official opposition and not for the committee. That I rather agree if Keir Starmer said those things today, I find I rather agree with him. And the planning system has become a very significant obstacle to development. We sit in the House of Lords fretting generally about whether the government has too much power and what we can do to hem its power. In fact, we've been so successful in that, we now have governments that are incapable of doing anything. They can't build anything, they can't deport anybody, they can't make routine decisions on expenditure to do with legal aid fees without judges interfering and telling them what to do. I mean, it's just constant. And they can't throw tomatoes in the bin without being sacked.
Let's cheer me up no end.
And the dysfunctionality we're facing, that of governments that can't actually act.
Well, I'm going to come back to the one issue about environmental regulation. I'm interested in terms of your thoughts in relation to that in a few moments. So I'll return to that. But can I just pick up one of your previous roles when you were had an oversight role in respect of Transport for London?
Yeah.
TfL comes under quite a lot of stick from a variety of different sectors, from a variety of different sources. Is it fit for purpose, or has it been given an impossible job?
It's meant to be both a transport provider and operator, and on a monopolistic basis. You could have an argument about whether it should be done monopolistically or there should be competition, but the assumption is the the working practice is that it's monopolistic in its provision, and that works for London. But it's also meant to be a strategic body, and it has responsibility for roads, some roads, and it funds the local authorities. It took that over from the government, so that it's the provider of funding for local authorities for their transport projects. And it also is meant to be involved in walking, cycling, and saving the environment, which, of course, is all about preventing transport and stopping cars from moving and removing road space and things like that. So it's actually full of tensions. What it needs, as always, is a strong mayoral hand, which knows what it wants and has a clear intellectual grasp of these contradictions, which that central mind can resolve. What it's got is Sadiq Khan, and it looks like we're going to have him for a long time to come.
Was there a stronger hand at the time that you had a greater involvement?
I think yes, Boris had a very strong hand.
That's a perhaps unsurprising answer, Daniel. In terms of other,
So did Ken, actually.
Yeah, that's
Give
true.
credit to Ken Livingstone. Ken knew exactly what he wanted and made sure, on the whole, that he got it, and understood from his previous exposure to local government running London how local government works, what the legal structures are, so what he can, what he can't do, how to push boundaries in that regard. Ken Livingstone he created the mayoralty out of nothing. I mean, he turned an Act of Parliament, which is a dead document, into a living office. And it could have been very different, but he made it. The mayoralty as it exists was created by Ken Livingstone.
In terms of other transport projects, we've obviously had experience in recent years of the successes, the Elizabeth line, and the near failures, HS2. Well, what do you think went right with the Elizabeth line and wrong with HS2?
Well, people would say things went wrong with the Elizabeth. I was on the board of Crossrail, which built it, and people would say some things went wrong and it was over budget and late, although not madly over budget and not very much later than you'd expect in a project like that. And as I always said, who in 100 years' time will care that it was 2 years late, or even that it went over budget by a certain amount. And I think that's true. I think that's all been eradicated in people's minds already by the success of the Elizabeth line. But I think both of them showed examples of what I regard as one of the biggest problems, which is that local authorities, this is true especially of those who object to the project, which was true in quite a large number of cases for HS2, much less so for the Elizabeth line, for a very obvious reason, which I'll come back to if you like. They're allowed to impose burdens so that the planning permission given by the Hybrid Act is broad. The detail comes from the local planning authorities. They impose burdens and nobody fights back. So the engineers just see a requirement for a bat tunnel as an engineering challenge, rather than somebody fighting back and saying, you must be joking. And we're not going to do that. And, take enforcement action and whatever, let's take this to court. Nobody does that. And so costs just pile up and complexity gets built into more and more complexity gets built into the system. The obvious reason, of course, is that the railways are great, and a railway running through your area is great if you have a station. If you don't have a station, it's completely bloody useless to you. It's just a disamenity. So the Elizabeth line had stations in practically all the boroughs through which it ran. So there was a genuine benefit to them in having the railway there. Whereas, of course, HS2, being a long-distance railway, there are large parts of the country that we could say it disfigures, which will get no benefit from it at all, ever.
It is, however, quite stark when you think about how we put a web of canals across the country with Acts of Parliament. We put a web of railway lines across the country with Acts of Parliament, and yet we can't get a train from the west of London into central London, and we can't get it beyond Birmingham. It is extraordinary.
Yes, it is, and it's a really good question. Why? And of course, it was all that was done with private money, the canals and the and the railways you're talking about were all done with private money. So there was a large amount of speculative finance available for those projects, because not all of them were successful.
No, far from it.
Most of the railways were financial disasters. Even in the middle of construction, they went bust. And they were picked up by somebody and built and finished and extended and so forth. So I think part of it is to do with the fact that it's the dead hand of the state talking to the dead hand of the state. And there's no room for entrepreneurialism in any of this.
And do you think that the process we have for nationally significant infrastructure projects, notwithstanding what was being said earlier, that we might get 150 of them consented in the next 20 minutes, do you think that's been a success? Or?
Well, I'm just trying to think of the large number of national infrastructure projects we've had. The hybrid bill process is clear, in my view, should grant much greater powers.
Yeah,
greater development powers. To the promoter. The DCO process, which was Gordon Brown's idea for making it all quicker, was just taken by his planning civil servants when they wrote it, and all the requirements were just front-loaded, and so it hasn't made anything quicker. And it's sort of in decay as far as I can see, because there aren't up-to-date national the development statements and so on. So it's all in decay. And at the lowest level, you've just got transport and works orders, which do actually work probably better for the projects they're suitable for.
Yeah, quite telling how many applications go in for 49.9 megawatts for solar farms, so they fall in the planning system, not the DCO system. So turning to the Built Environment Committee, how influential do you think its conclusions are?
Nobody pays any attention to anything that goes on. That was said to me with absolute assurance by an MP friend of mine when I joined it. It's not entirely true. And occasionally people do have to pay attention to the House of Lords. But I don't think I think the work we do is very valuable, but I don't think its value can be measured, shall we say, by the publicity and influence it has in the broader world. But I think many of the reports of select committees are quite highly regarded and have a certain influence and effect on thinking in the sort of circles in which take an interest in those sort of topics. And sometimes those are quite narrow circles. I mean, planning lawyers, for example, but environmentalists and so forth. I don't think it's a place you look to see great new policies made. That's always going to come out of the cabinet and principally out of the civil service. It used, of course, to come out of Europe. We have a civil service which is very good at implementing European directives and not very good at anything else. And so in current circumstances, it's pretty bereft and hopeless.
Yeah, although the one thing that the select committees do is they act on evidence and they give considered thoughts, which is certainly why they're worth reading, including the most recent report of the Built Environment Committee's consideration of high streets. But I'm not going to ask you about that.
Yes.
I'm going to ask you about that. I'm going to ask you about a previous one about environmental regulation and the thoughts of the Built Environment Committee with regard to that. We said we'd come back to your thoughts about how planning is over-regulated. Was that the conclusion? And if so, why?
Well, no, I think the conclusion of that paper was that the entire system is a total mess, really. And let me say straight away, there's no inherent conflict between building houses and improving the environment. We're a reasonably well-off country. And if we want to, over time, we can do both. We can both build houses and improve the natural environment. Why is that? Why is there an inherent contradiction in that? But we have set up a system which, in fact, you have two government departments, you have different government agencies with different remits who end up fighting each other effectively over this. And the result is that nobody gets what they want. You don't meet housing targets, but you don't have significant improvements to the environment. You have sillier and dafter policies for achieving things, and everyone panders to the now sort of world in which many of these people live. I want the rivers clean now. Well, the rivers are dirty in part because of a sewage system that was designed to deal with 95% of the sewage, because the cost of dealing with the last 5% would have been disproportionate to the whole, to the 95. So you take a certain risk, certain amount of overflow, but you have got rid of 95%. I mean, you really are proud of what you've achieved. And if you want to rebuild the sewage system, that's fine. You can do that if that's your focus for infrastructure investment and tax payments but it will take you 50 years, and you got to recognize that. If you want to change farming practice so that runoff doesn't go into the rivers, you can do that as well. But you saw what happened in the Netherlands when the Dutch tried to do it overnight, or at least not overnight, but very quickly. And the result is that the Prime Minister is now the Secretary General of NATO. It didn't last very long once the farmers came out on the streets.
It's interesting. I've got one last question before turning to my colleagues. The committee is currently engaging with the government's proposed grey belt approach to green belt policy. Before asking you this question, I had the pleasure of looking at Circular 42 of 55, which is the circular which rolled out Greenbelt policy to the rest of the country. It is exactly 1 page and a bit long. It's extraordinary how clear and concise it is, and yet we seem to now have thousands and thousands of pages to achieve a lesser objectives. So on that thesis, is the grey belt a shrewd way to break the spell of green belt, or is a better approach planned release through review, or is it both?
Well, we have that Angela Rayner up in front of our committee in 10 days' time or so, and we shall ask her that question. But I do think that if the policy has merit, and I'm not at all opposed to it in principle, if the policy has merit, it's not likely to be how many additional houses are built as a result of the grey belt thing. It's more likely because it is changing the terms of the debate. And it's interesting what you said in your case roundup, not you personally, but you and your colleagues said in your case roundup, about how many green belt applications are now. I mean, the inspectors have certainly heard the message, it would appear from what you're saying. And local authorities will start to hear it too. So I think it could turn out, whether it was intended this way or not, to be quite a shrewd way of breaking the ice flows to some extent in relation to green belt development. But that also has, despite the man in Chichester, that also has interesting consequences for non-green belt countryside. I think potentially.
I look forward to hearing what the Secretary of State says to you in answer to that question.
Well, it'll all be live streamed on Parliament Live whatever it's called, Parliament Live .uk.
Excellent. We'll get Rob to put a link on the show.
Yes, I have to say she has cancelled twice, so it's possible she cancelled again. But I hope not. I mean, her office have, apologized and offered new dates. They don't give the impression of running away, but they give the impression of genuine clashes. I'm just hoping it goes ahead.
Excellent. Well, I should look forward to that. Mary, do you have a question for Daniel?
I do. Thank you very much. Well, hopefully it's a case of third time lucky, Daniel, when it comes to Angela. I too wanted to take you back to that report on the impact of environmental regulations, because in that report you noted, your committee noted, that the brownfield development is a key policy of government, and you warned that biodiversity net gain, which was sort of coming down the track, would disincentivize remediating brownfield sites, and in particular you noted that the remediating brownfield sites can in itself affect the baseline value of a site. And you also suggested that there ought to be different biodiversity net gain requirements for greenfield sites on the one hand and previously developed sites on the other. I mean, my question to you after that little gentle run-up is, do you see any evidence that your warnings have been heeded?
No, the biodiversity net gain was built into statute. I forget now which...
Environment Act.
So it was built in statute, and so one would notice if there was a change because there would be an act of parliament that I would have spotted that had that effect, and there hasn't been such. So it hasn't been changed. I mean, all we were saying is that we were really giving it as an example of perverse outcomes, is that not all brownfield sites, but derelict sites become biodiverse quite quickly. Because things grow, weeds grow, mice arrive, and all of a sudden you have a happy ecosystem on your ex-brewery that to you looks derelict, but in fact is thriving with natural life. And so if you're going to flatten all that and concrete it over and improve biodiversity, your baseline has shifted adversely from a development point, from a financing point of view. And so it disincentivizes the development of brownfield sites. And ultimately it goes to land value, but it sort of depends on, to value the land, you have to go around counting the dormice, which seems a bit bizarre if you're banning.
We currently, I work for a law firm, and the number one topic at the moment is biodiversity net gain, actually. And I think it's really, we're at the very early stages of the statutory process. Very few councils have approved actually gain plans. And I think it's going to be something that's going to really thwart the otherwise really ambitious plans for 1.5 million homes. So I can only hope that the government softens its position. And it may well be forced.
I say it's quite difficult to the sort of the statutory element of it, which is a sort of requirement. I don't know if the plans are even necessary to it. There might be a means of achieving a statutory objective, but the statutory objective is there, the requirement. Certain percentages of
yes, the 10% is yes, absolutely
are required, and it can be set higher by local planning authorities. We illustrated that as there's this constant tension between development and food production. As the obvious, you build on a field, you can't grow wheat in the field if you built on it. That's obvious. But even the biodiversity net gain, if you build in a field over here, but you then buy a field over there which you turn fallow in order to offset your biodiversity net gain, that field also is taken out of agricultural production. So we also have a DEFRA target for a certain percentage. 60% of our food should continue to come, as it does, from domestic sources. But then we don't know how much agricultural land we're going to lose to natural wilding over.
Good point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary. We have an extraordinary Venn diagram because the Venn diagram of panellists that we have includes charming, understated, Brummy, member of the House of Lords, and Charlie overlaps with two of those. Charlie, you have a question for Daniel.
I do. And I'm going to stick with the theme of the committee's report on the impact of environmental regulation on development. And Daniel, one of the things that report says or observes is that in the context of nutrient neutrality, but I think it's a point probably made more broadly, it would be nice if government departments worked in a bit more coordinated fashion. And certainly that was my experience of some involvement I had in nutrient neutrality. You get turf wars between DEFRA, for whom habitats regs, and EIA, they say this is our job, and they're not so interested in building homes. And DLUC, we're not so interested in the environment all the time. They don't want to build the homes. And there's no real, unless you've got a PM who's into the nooks and crannies of it, you don't necessarily have any coordination. So my question in light of that is, might any combination or the totality of planning, transport, environment and infrastructure be better dealt with under a single consolidated super department, much as it was the time of the recently departed John Prescott?
I think a more attractive idea is having no department dealing with lawyers at all and just letting everybody get on. But of course, that's completely hopeless in the modern age. We're now running such an expensive state that at some point, it will go bust. And we will have to manage without a lot of departments of state that we think are absolutely essential to life. And maybe it should be those. I think one should always be, being a little bit more serious, one should always be chary of imagining that a reorganization of government is going to achieve anything other than an increase in cost.
Yeah.
Very rarely does it achieve anything by way of real change in itself. We're meant to have a system which coordinates the actions of government. We're meant to have a cabinet office, which is there partly for coordination. Nobody much seems to be doing all of that. You mentioned two departments that are of particular interest to this conversation. But there are others, and there are agencies like Historic England. There is indeed Historic England, but I mean, there's agencies like Natural England, which is what I meant to refer to, and the Environment Agency, which are often working at odds. And the Environment Agency has internal contradictions as well. Say it owns it is an owner of land, and which it can't afford to maintain. So, what it looks for in planning applications is often quite self-regarding. In some ways, there's sort of inherent conflicts that nobody seems to bother about, and they of course are licensing farmers to put slurry into rivers, and Natural England has no purchase on that, so they seek to correct everything via the planning system, over which they do have a degree of purchase. So it's the effluent from a house becomes the only thing they can control, but it's not the cause of the problem.
Right.
In rivers, it's just not the issue. Now, we also have other problems, again, partly to do with the planning system, over sufficiencies of water. We don't have enough reservoirs. We don't have water to supply large new settlements. And of course, we also have human rights problems. I mean, I'm not entirely sure that and I'm not a lawyer, that the corporations that built the new towns in the post-war period would actually survive scrutiny under the Human Rights Act nowadays, because they simply seized land effectively. They paid what they decided was the land was worth. There was no question of property rights really involved in any of this, and they just took control, and that's how they built places like Milton Keynes. I sat on the board of the Ebbsfleet Development Corporation. And it's really quite interesting how narrow the powers are of the modern version of a development corporation compared to the new town corporations that created the new towns. Now, how is the government going to deal with that? They want new towns, and I think that is a good solution in principle to some of our problems, subject to all the detail and all that. But how are they going to deal with the fact that we don't seem able to take those great powers that the new town corporations had, because the lawyers
can't please everybody. You end up pleasing nobody if you're not careful.
And we end up doing nothing.
Yes, indeed.
Our last two questions would have been from Chris and Sasha, but it turns out that during the course of the discussion over the last half an hour, you've managed to answer them. And well done. Thank you very much, Daniel. They needn't even ask you the questions. Thank you so much for coming on the show. That's been absolutely
very much indeed. It's been great fun.
It really has. Thank you, Daniel. It's been hugely fascinating, and we're so hugely grateful. I know you've got a very busy day, so thank you very much. And we will look forward to watching you give Angela Rayner a grilling if she turns up.
No, we're very polite in our committee.
Of course.
We genuinely want to know what their policies are. And there's no question of giving anybody a grilling or the third degree.
Lentil saute, perhaps. Well, thank you very much.
Another way in which you don't overlap with Charlie.
Well, thank you again, Daniel. That's it, kind of, for this year, because we used to do our NPPF specials as a surprise, but I think, Maya, you have a legitimate expectation by convention that we will do one within 24 hours or so of whenever it comes out. So we probably will see you all for a special. Our next regular episode is going to be on the 16th of January, where we've got another member of the House of Lords. It happened, Ben Houchen, the Tees Valley Mayor, who's going to talk about metro mayors and the potential role they may have in relation to planning and development, etc., over the next or the remainder of the parliamentary term. So Ben's joining us then. So we would say Happy Christmas, but in reality, we'll see you all before Christmas for the NPPF special, it seems, in light of the commitment in Parliament today for it to be released before Christmas. So with that, Daniel, once again, thank you very much. Good to hear you, everybody, and cheers.
Cheers. Thank you.
Bye-bye.